Wow, I can't believe this is still my most popular video. It's over 2 years old. Almost 60,000 views and 300 comments. I haven't looked at these in a while.
It's pronounced Ohuhu.
What was that?
Ohuhu.
Hello?
You're saying it
Who's
wrong.
there?
That's not how it's pronounced.
This video is from 2017.
You're saying it wrong.
I don't pronounce it like that anymore.
It's pronounced
I've changed.
Ohuhu.
You know, you're just spelling it. You're not spelling it phonetically. That doesn't help. What's going on? Stop it! Stop it! Today we are going to be reviewing the Ohuhu brush markers. Now, I've actually already done a video on Ohuhu markers, and it's actually my most viewed video. I did it back in 2017. And the most popular comment on that video is how I pronounced Ohuhu. I have since discovered that these markers are pronounced Ohuhu, not Oahu, like I was pronouncing them in the first video. But with all of your help, I am now saying it correctly, and we can review these markers for what they are, which is a very inexpensive art supply. So let's get into it. Just like the previous set of Ohuhu markers, these come in a little zipper pouch, although I will say they have reworked their markers a few times since my initial review. The original set that I reviewed was the 40 marker set of bullet nib and chiseled nib markers. This is the 48 set of brush markers. So not only have they revamped their bullet nib markers, but now they also have brush markers, and these have been very highly sought after. They were sold out on Amazon, so when I saw the opportunity to order these, I jumped at it and have been sitting on them waiting to review. So compared to the original Ohuhu markers, these barrels are completely round, which I have to say gives them kind of a nice feel. The caps are round as well, and then they have kind of a little indent where the color indicator pops out. So I think the design is really, really nice. Obviously, you have the brand name and the nib indicators. You don't have any color information on the barrel itself, which is something that you see pretty frequently in more inexpensive brands. The metallic writing is a nice touch. And then you have a gray band on the side with the brush nib, which is similar to Copics. And I will say, guys, this is a very sexy looking brush nib. This comes to a really, really nice point. It seems really sharp. I can't really speak to the flexibility of it yet, just because I haven't actually tried these on paper. I've swatched them, but I swatched them using the chisel nib, which is nothing we haven't seen before. There is also color information on the cap, and I do appreciate how bold and big their font choice is for the letter and number indicators. Obviously, the name of the color itself can be a little bit small because that isn't typically what people tend to go by, or at least me personally. I go by these larger numbers here. I think for 48 colors, you do get a really nice variety in here. I'll show you the swatches here in a moment as well. But I also wanted to briefly mention that this set comes with something I haven't seen before. This is a color guard, I suppose. I'm not really sure what else I would call this. But it's this little sheet of plastic. You can see it is very warped because it comes in the set just wrapped around the markers like so. So it did not maintain a very nice shape, which is unfortunate because that kind of renders this a little bit unusable. But it says, if you're coloring on thin paper, please put this pad between your coloring sheets to prevent any bleed through. This is a really nice thing to include because I think Ohuhu recognizes that a lot of the people buying these markers are going to be beginner artists or artists on a budget, and budget paper does tend to be a little bit thinner. So kind of going along with the budget markers, you have the budget paper, and they give you this sheet of plastic to kind of just help prevent the marker from bleeding through. As far as how effective it is, I can't really say. Obviously, I mean, because it's so warped, it has been a little bit difficult to use, because if you put this under a sheet of paper, it kind of lifts the paper and makes your drawing surface uneven. And this is after me trying to flatten this out by putting it between a couple of books for a few days. So unfortunately, I don't know how salvageable it is. I've been tempted to try heating it up a little bit with like a hairdryer to try and get that shape back. But you can see it was stained here with some marker ink when I was swatching the colors in my sketchbook. And I used the Canson Mixed Media Sketchbook. You can see all of the colors did bleed through pretty significantly. And bled through onto the plastic. And the one thing I would be worried about here is that if you were using thinner paper, there is the possibility that this ink that is left on the surface of the plastic could be reactivated and potentially kind of bleed through a really, really thin paper and contaminate your color. So just something to be wary of if you intend to use this. Personally, I don't. If you're looking for an equally cheap alternative to this, something I recommend is just using cardboard. I use this all of the time. This is just a scrap piece of cardboard that I got, and it's actually more of a chipboard, but cardboard would work as well. You can see the ink definitely does bleed through, but unlike the plastic, this is not going to reactivate, or at least not nearly as easily as on the plastic. So this could be potentially a free alternative for you over something like this. Now, getting into the swatches, I kind of broke things down into color categories here, just to really get a sense of how much of each color family we're really getting. You can see we have two yellows, one kind of more of an ochre, one more of kind of a traditional butter yellow, which I really like. You also have these really nice oranges. You really only kind of have one true orange, but you do get a couple of more desaturated oranges, which are really nice and are almost more in the brown family, as well as this one kind of nice peachy tone, which I really like as well, and I can see myself using that color quite a bit. The browns are not as extensive as I would like them to be, but like I mentioned, I could see myself pairing these with some of these more orange shades up here. The reds, you do get quite a variety of reds. I really love the selection here. R2, R4, and R5 are pretty similar, so I'm not exactly sure if each one of these is completely necessary in this set, but I also know that sometimes these colors can appear slightly differently depending on the paper that you use, so there's the potential that these will be more different depending on the paper you're using. Same thing with R7 and R8. I don't know that we needed both of these in this set, but I'm not gonna be too much of a stickler on that. I also think it's a little odd that R10 and R11 are included in the reds color family, because I feel like they definitely fit more in the purples category. The purples are really nice. You get some warm purples and some cool purples, and I think that P1 is pretty similar to R7 and R8, but I think it's different enough that these would actually be really good to blend together and wouldn't necessarily be like duplicates. I love colors like P3 and R11, but again, I think these are almost too similar to each other that I think it would have been nice to have potentially some more colors in the brown or yellow color family. RP1 is kind of the only color of its kind, although I could see it blending really nicely with some of these mid-tone reds as well as some of these purples, so I am happy that we have that. It's a really beautiful color. I'm also happy with the range of blues here. I think one thing I would have liked to see is a really, really dark kind of indigo blue, because that's something that I personally use a lot in my work, but I think you get some nice kind of cooler blues as well as some kind of more turquoise colors, so I'm not too disappointed with the blue range. You get a lot of greens here. In fact, you actually have one blue green, but I kind of lumped that in with the greens because I felt like it just fit there so well. And is a little similar to G1, so between BG1 and G1, I think I would have been happy with just BG1. And again, some similarities here with these mid-tone yellowish greens that I just don't know that we needed all of them, and we probably could have seen some more neutrals in this set instead. And speaking of neutrals, you do get some nice grays in here. You get one warm gray, wish there would have been maybe one or two more in this set, and 3 cool grays as well as a black. You don't get a colorless blender in this set, but you can get a colorless blender in many different marker brands, so you can pick one up from literally any brand, and I would honestly recommend probably getting a refillable one from Copic or Blick or Spectrum Noir, so that you can continue to use that long term, because it is kind of a staple in any marker artist's tool belt. You'll notice that this set largely consists of mid-tones with a couple of darker tones, but overall a lot of inexpensive marker brands are lacking when it comes to really pastel, light, desaturated tones, and that is no different here with Ohuhu. These colors are really bright, they're vibrant, they're bold, they're beautiful, but it doesn't necessarily give you a super well-rounded set because we are lacking those cooler, more desaturated pastel tones. So that is something that I think will be missed with me in this set because I really use those colors a lot in my marker work, but I think we'll be able to manage just fine. When it comes down to it, this is an inexpensive marker set, and the fact that Ohuhu now offers a brush pen version is so amazing. I think many artists out there would benefit from trying out the brush marker at a really affordable price. See if you like it, and if you do, you can invest from there. I'm really excited to try these out. I had a really great experience with Ohuhu markers back in 2017, and I'm expecting no different here. In fact, I'm kind of hoping the quality has even gotten better since 2017. So with that being said, I have these two sketches here. This is on the Recollections brand cardstock that I mentioned in my previous video on my favorite marker paper, so you can check that out in the iCards. This is an original character of mine named Rhea. You are going to see a lot of this character coming up this year for Inktober, so I'm excited to be able to share more about this character in the very near future. But for now, I thought it would just be fun to try coloring these complementary pieces using the Ohuhu markers. So let's get into it. I'm gonna keep my color swatches out next to me just to have as a reference, and I'm just gonna kind of rearrange things here. I like to start with really light colors when it comes to markers, so I think I'm just gonna start with some basic cool grays on the skin. This is Cool Gray 200. Kind of an odd number to have. Again, I think this brush marker is so nice looking. It's just a really nice shape, and it comes to a really sharp point. So I'm just gonna kind of start laying this down. I'm not gonna worry too much about staying within the lines here because a lot of the surrounding colors are gonna be darker, so we can afford to be a little messy. This is a very juicy marker. You can tell like the paper is getting really quickly saturated with ink to the point where it's actually even kind of shiny and glossy. I would say the marker is teetering on being overfilled where it has too much ink in it, so I want to be careful to avoid any ink splatters on my drawing here. That is something that can happen when your marker is overfilled. It can kind of leak out onto your paper. So while it may seem good to have more ink, it can also be troublesome as well. One thing I also wanted to point out that I noticed with this color in particular, R11, this color indicator on the cap is vastly different from the color that we see on the actual page. On the paper, it's much, much darker, and that is one thing I was a little bit disappointed by because initially I thought this was going to be a very close color match to BV00 from Copic, which is the color I use and love a lot for shading facial features. This isn't necessarily a bad color, it's just a little bit darker and more saturated than I would like. But as you can see here, it still works really nicely. I think I'll try and mute that out a little bit with the warm gray, so I'm just gonna layer that over the purple just to soften it a little bit and make that color less intense. I'm gonna take just a little bit of this YR4 shade, which is kind of this peachy orange. This is the closest color that we currently have to like a blush, so I'm just going to lightly dab that on the cheeks. I'm gonna try and be pretty sparing with it because I'm actually going to blend this out with a colorless blender from a different marker brand since we don't have one from Ohuhu. So I'm just taking my Copic colorless blender and softening the edges of that peachy color, as well as some of the other edges from the layers we've put down. Those two seem to play pretty nicely together, which is good and as to be expected. Now, oddly enough, the color that is going to be most prominent in this piece is black, because this character just has a lot of black in her design. So this is going to kind of overwhelm a lot of this piece. So we're not really necessarily going to use a lot of the colors, but I think if a marker brand has a really nice black, that is a very impressive quality, because a lot of blacks end up just looking really grayed out. So far in my experience, this black seems to be really nice and rich. Again, I want to be wary because it seems very juicy and potentially overfilled, so I want to avoid it leaking onto the rest of my paper. So far, this brush nib is really, really nice. That fine point makes it so that it's really easy to navigate around fine lines. And it is still decently flexible, so I am able to get some good line variety and use really nice sweeping motions, which is exactly what I would want out of a brush nib. Okay, now that we have the larger areas blocked off, I'm actually just going to go in with the chisel nib because it's going to be a little bit faster and more even coverage. All right, so I told you guys that was going to take up a majority of this illustration. I think to break it up, I'm going to switch to using the cool grays on the leotard part of her outfit, just so that we get some variety in here and it doesn't feel so overwhelmed with the black marker. I will say the black performed really nicely though. I think I'm going to switch to the chisel nib again because you're going to get much more even coverage when working in larger areas than you will with the brush nib. Then I'm going to shade with this slightly darker cool gray just to get some dimension in there. I'm not expecting it to be a whole lot, and I can even kind of work to make it more of a gradient. Again, I'm a little bit wary of some of the markers being overly filled. That kind of seems to be a common theme. I'm even kind of noticing that some of the ink just pools on top of the paper for a while it's attempting to sink in. That just tells me that there's definitely a lot of marker ink in here, which is not a bad thing, but like I said, it's just potentially a risk to leaking onto your paper, so you want to be careful. The markers are really blending very effortlessly. I'm not having to do a whole lot to get them to blend together. I think that is partially due to the fact that I'm working on a thinner paper, and the markers being really saturated means that there's still probably a lot of slightly wet ink when I'm putting the next layer down. So that's probably helping, but I also think it does speak a little bit to the quality of the Ohuhu markers just really blending nicely on their own. So I'm just going to deepen up some of these shadows on the skin a little bit more, going back with that R11 shade. I just want to make it a little bit darker. I might even extend the warm gray a little bit just because I feel like I want a little bit less white in her skin and a little bit more gray. I'm also going to use that to blend out the blush even more because I like the way that that looks. And we can kind of just use the white of the paper to act as our highlights. Yeah, I like the way that looks actually, because it's kind of turning the warm gray into our skin tone, which looks really nice, I think. And then just going in with that colorless blender one more time to soften any of the edges that turned out to be a little bit too harsh. I'm going to intensify that blush a little bit, and to do that I'm actually going to use the shade R9. much more saturated, and then I'll blend that out with the peach tone. And with the warm gray. I kind of covered up a little bit of that cheek highlight more than I wanted. So we can go in with the colorless blender just to kind of pick that up again. Getting a little muddy there, so I want to be careful. I'll let that dry for a minute and just see how it turns out. The eye color, I'm gonna do this dark gray and hit it with just a little bit of black for the iris. And then for the background, I'm thinking I kind of want to do like a very rough galaxy thing. So I'm gonna use these two colors, PB1 and PB6. Very different, but I think with some blending we can make it work. So I think I'm near done with this illustration. I'm just kind of adding a few final touches with the markers. I think for the most part, this was pretty effortless on my part with the blending, which I love. That's my favorite thing about markers, is that the blending should kind of come naturally with the help of the brush nib and the marker ink kind of naturally wanting to mix together. So these definitely meet my requirements on that. The brush nib performs really, really nicely. I think the biggest thing I would be concerned about is how quickly the nibs wear down, because these nibs are not going to be replaceable and the ink not refillable. So with how oversaturated they've been and how quickly the ink has been coming out, I do have a feeling that these are a marker that would tend to dry up quickly, and that the nibs might tend to break down a little bit quickly just because they are offering a brush nib for such a low price, that I would be a little bit concerned just about the longevity of a marker like this. But I think the blending is beautiful, and like I said, for the most part, really, really effortless. Even the colors that I mixed up here, I'm really happy with the way that they kind of softened and blended out. As you can see, the ink did bleed through pretty significantly, but it did not bleed onto my surface of my desk, which I have protected anyway. I basically have just like a large scale version of whatever this tiny sheet is, and that has prevented any ink from bleeding through onto my desk and permanently damaging it. So I'm just gonna add a few final touches with some white gel pen, and then I will be back with my final thoughts. I also think I'm gonna color this one off camera, just because you probably don't wanna see it. I mean, it's basically just the same thing as this one. I'm gonna use the same colors. I'm gonna do the same thing. So I'll check in with you in a minute. Okay. All right, so our two illustrations are finished, and I am just going to kind of wrap up this video with my final thoughts on the Ohuhu brush markers. First of all, I haven't mentioned the price of these markers yet, so looking on Amazon right now, the 48 set retails for $35. And if you have Amazon Prime, you get 2-day free shipping. So it works out to about 73 cents a marker, which I think is by far the most unbeatable, affordable price for a brush marker that I have seen thus far. I was really impressed with the performance of the brush nib. Sometimes with brush nib markers that I've tried, it seems like you need to kind of break the brush in a little bit so that it gets to be more flexible, but these were flexible right off the bat. And again, it's a sexy brush nib. Like, it comes to such a fine point. You get a lot of really, really good control with it. Like I keep mentioning, the fact that these markers are really heavily saturated with ink has made it a little bit hard to get fine details because so much of that ink is coming out of the nib at one time. Not that that's a bad thing. Obviously, you'd rather have an overfilled marker than an underfilled marker, but in this case, I just want to mention that because I feel like it's more of a quality control thing where they're not exactly sure how much ink is in the marker, and it can just make it a little bit tricky. So that's just something I want to mention. They blend beautifully. The colors are really, really pigmented, although one thing that I think is even more drastic in this case than in most, these are really different on the cap than they are in actuality. Just to kind of demonstrate that for you, this dark blue that I used in the background is this Pb6 Royal Blue, which on the cap looks kind of like a cornflower blue. It looks a lot more mid-tone, but the swatch is actually this like darker kind of indigo color. It didn't actually appear that dark on this paper, which again comes down to the point I was mentioning where the ink can appear slightly different depending on the paper you're using. This is a mixed media paper. This is a cardstock, and a thinner cardstock at that, so the color appeared a little bit lighter here. But I just want to point out that the caps are drastically different than what you get in the barrel, especially in some of these cases like with R11, where it looks like you have kind of a very pale lilac purple and you're getting more of this mid-tone purple. So all that really means for you is swatch your markers. Swatch your markers and have this out with you while you are working at all times using these markers. If you don't have this, you're going to have some mismatches between the cap and the color itself. As you keep working with these markers, you'll get to know this set really well, and that will become less of an issue. It's an issue that all marker brands have. It's just a little bit more drastic in this case. I think that was even the case with this PB1 Sky Blue marker. It looks a lot more pastel in the cap than it does in the swatch. So there is an overall lack of lighter colors in this set, and that is something that I would like to see more of. I would also just like to see more neutrals. I think when you're getting into brush marker territory, I really want to see a really curated set, and I think this is pretty good, probably like a B+ as far as like color curation goes, but it's not spot on. I know for my own personal preference, I would have liked to have had a colorless blender in this set. I would have liked to have had at least 1 or 2 more grays, preferably warm grays, because you only get one. A little bit more maybe like browns, maybe some cooler browns too, because we have a lot of really nice warm browns, both in the brown color family and in the orange color family, but we don't really have a lot of cooler browns, so that would be really nice to see as well. But I think overall I'm impressed with these markers. I knew I would be, but I think now looking back at the price, $35 for 48 brush markers is a steal. Like, these are so good. I could totally take or leave this little plastic doohickey. I don't think it's necessary. I think you can use lots of other things in place of that, but I guess it's thoughtful that they include it. If you are interested in trying these markers for yourself, I do have an Amazon link down below. As you guys know, I'm an Amazon affiliate, so if you do purchase these markers through that link, I get a little bit of money, but it helps to support the channel, and it does not affect the cost of the product to you. So I think it's just a really great way to support me if you are already interested in trying these markers. If not, you don't have to use the affiliate link if you don't want to. You can just type in Ohuhu markers on Amazon, and these are sure to pop up because they're incredibly popular. I know a lot of people have already reviewed these on YouTube, but I definitely wanted to give them a try myself, especially because the Ohuhu marker video that I did back in 2017 performed so well. Clearly there's an interest for this kind of thing. So yeah, there you have it, my thoughts on the updated Ohuhu brush markers. If you do want to watch the 2017 version where I pronounce the name wrong the entire time, it's linked up in the iCards and will be at the end of this video. But that wraps it up for today's video. I hope you guys liked it. If you like these illustrations, then good. You're gonna see a lot more of this character in the next few weeks. So look forward to that. I'm super excited for Inktober. I'm doing my own original story, so I'm really excited and I hope you guys are too. Real quick before I let you go, I just want to say a big thank you to my Patreon family. This video specifically could not have been possible without the help of Rachel, Janine, Lisa, and Vienna. So thank you guys so much for supporting me. And if you are interested in becoming a patron, there's more information for that in the description box down below. Thank you guys so much for watching again, and I'll see you on the internet. Bye. Ignore the fact that I only have nail polish in my pinky. Okay, bye.